All right, am I coming out of the speakers?
Yep.
Yay! All right, super. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all here to the Butler County Historical Society. Besides Charlene, has anybody ever been here before? I know, yes. Okay, super. So a few of you, awesome. Great, welcome back. For those of you who have never been here, welcome. Thanks for coming. So basically, we'll have a program here. I did this program last year, I believe it was, in the summer. And it was one of our sellouts. We actually added another day and sold out again that day. So it was a very popular program. I'm actually giving it at the end of the month at Miami University Hamilton downtown. So there's some things in here that probably aren't for everybody. However, there's something in here for everybody. So, so there's missing persons. We call it Bizarre Butler County. Missing persons, unsolved mysteries. We talk about UFO sightings in the county a little bit. We talk about strange creatures that have been seen in the county that shouldn't be here. There's buried treasure. There's legends. There's ghosts. So it's a little bit of all this kind of odd and weird and bizarre stuff that apparently appeals to people because, like I said, we sold out twice. So my name is Brian Smith. I am the executive director here, again, I want to thank you all for coming. So as we kind of go through this, there'll probably be some things that you might be familiar with. There may be some things that you're not familiar with. As we go through, I know some people say, oh, hold all your questions till the end. I am not one of those people. I was a high school English teacher for 22 years. I am used to being interrupted, so don't worry about that. So yeah, if you have a question, just please, raise your hand, shout out, and we can deal with it right then. So you don't have to remember it until the end. So hopefully my clicker works. So we are going to start off in 1818 with John Cleve Symmes. So John Cleve Symmes that we're going to be talking about is the nephew of John Cleve Symmes that basically had the Symmes Purchase, which all of this area basically grew out of that original plot of land that was deeded to Symmes from the U.S. government, and most of the Symmes Purchase was then given to veterans of the Revolutionary War as their payment for their service, and so that's how we basically became inhabited in this area, most largely from those people moving west across the Allegheny Mountains. So John Cleve Symmes, the nephew, had this odd idea that the earth was hollow, and that inside the earth were these layers of environs that were inhabitable. And he believed that inside the earth there were, there was water, there were people, there were plants, there were animals, and all of these things. So he declares in 1818 that he believes the earth is hollow, and he would spend the last 11 years of his life trying to prove this theory. In fact, many, including his son, Americus, basically believe that the rabid pursuit of this dream is what ultimately led to his death. He just basically exhausted himself. He was constantly traveling around the globe trying to push this theory and get investors to buy into this theory so they could mount expeditions and go see if they could find. He believed that the poles, each pole, the North and South Pole, had this rather large opening that you could get into and basically go to the center of the earth. He believed that there was a world inside the world, again, plant life, animals, men. He believed there was another race of men that was in there that were flourishing. And these openings at the poles became known as Symmes's holes. Documents explaining the bizarre theory contain maps of what was called Symmsonia, including a river which he believed dumped from the inside of the earth out, and that's what actually filled our oceans. So in 1818, he asked 100 brave companions to get equipped start from Siberia. They were going to explore the northern polar regions to prove or disprove this theory. Now, up to this time, that had never been done. So that was still very uncharted territory. The expedition, of course, never materialized, mainly because a lot of people believe Sims was a little off his nut. And again, it was, there was just a lot of people who, scientists were disclaiming it, saying there's no way that's possible. He wrote articles. He went on grueling lecture circuits to garner financial backing. He vowed to pledge his life to support the truth and to investigate the hollows if the world would support and assist the venture. He had a lot of trouble finding investors, but that's not to say that he didn't have investors. He did actually garner a considerable amount of support. These people became known as Simsites, but the majority of the scientific community and the political communities basically considered him a crackpot. John J. Audubon, who you may have heard, he's the bird guy, he was very much behind Sims and believed in his theory and contributed money to the theory. Nations around the globe, however, did not provide Sims with funding, though U.S. President John Quincy Adams did provide Sims with money through the Congress, basically allocated funds for it. However, before those funds were dispersed, Adams lost his next election, and Andrew Jackson moved into the White House and immediately canceled funding for that. So that did not occur. After a massive and exhausting lecture tour in 1829, Sims died in his Fairfield Township farm at the age of 49. He was buried the next day with military honors, as he had served as a captain in the War of 1812 in the Hamilton Cemetery, which is now known as 4th Ward or Ludlow Park, which is down on the South 3rd Street and Sycamore. There was some discrepancy as to when the actual Hollow Earth monument was placed over his grave. So that monument is basically still in the park. Some say that almost immediately, while others point to a story of America Sims addressing the Hamilton City Council in 1873 to announce the plans to construct a monument to honor his father. And this is in the newspaper. So there is some discrepancy as to when John Cleves Sims was actually buried in the Hamilton burying grounds at that time. Now, in the 1840s, all of those graves were moved out of that cemetery and into the new Greenwood Cemetery, which was formed in 1848. So clearly Sims was there sometime, probably right after he died. His son just took some time to actually have that monument constructed. The problem is, if his son waited until 1873 to have that monument constructed, Sims would have already been removed to Greenwood. Legend is, theory is, the story is currently that Sims is actually still buried there. That monument does sit on top of him. And even last summer, they actually found 2 additional graves as part of an Eagle Scout project that a young man was doing. Found the grave of a Revolutionary War veteran and his wife in the far corner of the park. So it is possible that there are still graves in that park that were not moved to Greenwood in 1848, but that is to say, it cannot be proved, and the city up to this point has refused to investigate that. There are people who want that monument moved because it is vandalized fairly often. To move to a safer location, and the city refuses to do that because the rumor is that it's possible that Cleves is still buried there and they want the monument to remain where that is. So, is he there? Is he not there? We don't know, but we do know that basically he pushed this theory immensely. Jules Verne actually took Sims's theory as the basis for his book, Journey to the Center of the Earth. So it did have a lot of say, and people did, kind of interestingly enough, give it some credence. We're going to jump to Oxford. Arthur Kettling was an unassuming young man who arrived in Oxford on May 11th of 1909 to take classes. He settled down in his dorm, he had dinner that night, and even made a stop at a watch repair shop to have his watch worked on. They were too busy at the time, and that he said he would come back. He did not. The next morning, a CH&I train traveling from Oxford to its destination in Connersville, Indiana, contained a gruesome sight when it pulled into the Connorsville station. The bloody, tattered remnants of a suit coat were found wrapped around the wheels. Rail officials walked the track and discovered just outside of Oxford the bloody, battered, and dismembered body of Arthur Ketterling. Officials assumed that he had been hit by a train and had been dragged a sizable distance as body parts were strewn down the tracks. What they did not immediately notice were that his wrists and throat had been cut. 4 slashes to each wrist and 3 to the throat. The railroad inspector who was looking for clues noticed a rather grubby-looking man washing his hands in a large tin can, but when he came back, the man was gone. Large amounts of blood were found along the tracks, and the railroad said that based on train timetables, the body had been run over by at least 4 trains. Some early reports proposed suicide, but Butler County coroner at the time, John Burnett, believed that the young man was a victim of foul play from the very beginning. Investigators searched and questioned dormmates, fraternity brothers, and others, but very few knew Ketterling as he had only arrived in Oxford the previous day before. He had signed up for his classes, he purchased his textbooks and his supplies, and was succinctly dead. Burnett claimed that Ketterling's actions of the previous day were not those of a suicidal individual. Eventually, Ketterling's razor was found down an embankment near the site of the incident, as was a bloody rock and numerous varied footprints leading away from the site. During the coroner's inquest, Ketterling's mother received a letter threatening her life if she testified or allowed the inquest to continue. It was signed by the Black Hand, an anarchistic European group that supposedly had ties to the Sicilian mafia. Other factions of various political views were created in Europe during the early 1900s. The letter stated that Ketterling had talked too much to the police, revealing secrets of the group, and was punished for it, and she would be next. It mentioned that Ketterling was a member of the Black Hand, but was unloyal. When that tack did not work, Coroner Burnett received similar letters threatening his life and the life of his family unless he stopped the inquiry. He did not, and ultimately found that Ketterling's death was a result of murder and that he was dead before his body was placed on the tracks. So he was from Cincinnati.
Okay.
In 5 years after this, right, so another Black Hand agent by the name of Gavrilo Princip would execute Archduke Franz Ferdinand, sparking the beginning of World War I. Were the letters a hoax? Were they written by the guilty party to throw off suspicions and perhaps stop the investigation? Were they in fact reporting that Ketterling was a Black Hand agent and was killed for disloyalty to the group? The Black Hand at this time in the early 1900s was a very popular group for young people and college-age students as they were trying to enforce change in the government. Was Ketterling killed by somebody you knew, or was the mysterious hand-washing stranger the culprit? Did he commit suicide as some thought? The coroner thought no, but the mystery was never solved.
So the Black Hand, is it a...
So it's a political group. It was a political group, and again, but basically their theory or they were promoting anarchy. So they were very anti-government. And they basically had their initial beginnings, which some believed where it was tied to the Sicilian mafia, and it kind of spread and became something else. But again, it was mostly young people that were basically trying to change government. They were very anti-government and wanted anarchy, which is like everybody can do whatever they want. You can't tell us what to do. And of course, as I said, that group did claim responsibility for the murder of Franz Ferdinand, which started World War I. So, and there were Black Hand groups in the United States at the time. It was just that became just a common name for any group of young people that was trying to overthrow government. They took that name. I found this story incredibly interesting. One, because I had known the story before. I had watched the movie starring Clint Eastwood, but I had no idea of the local ties that were involved. So on the morning of January 23rd, 1958, FBI agents and Hamilton police burst into adjoining apartment buildings at 105, 109, and 111 Dayton Street. along the south side of the street across from Mercy Hospital. So we are literally talking 1 block to the south of us. Now those apartment buildings were once standing where the new Markham apartments are currently standing. They were looking for a suspected bank robber and 2 Florida prison escapees. John Anglin had robbed a bank in Columbia, Alabama of $19,000 6 days earlier, and he was apprehended with a Hamilton woman by the name of Helen McIntosh in an apartment owned by her father, Mr. Ferd Taylor. Clarence Anglin, along with his brother Robert Anglin and Robert's wife Janet, were arrested in the apartment next door. Both the Anglin brothers had escaped from a Florida prison a few weeks earlier. The 3 brothers, Janet Anglin, Helen McIntosh, and her father, were bound over and sent to federal court in Cincinnati, Ohio, and convicted of various crimes. John and Clarence Anglin were sent back to Florida prison, but after another escape attempt, they were transferred to San Francisco's famed and feared Alcatraz prison known as the Rock, reserved for the most violent and troublesome of inmates. Alcatraz operated from 1934 to 1963. There were 14 escape attempts made by 34 prisoners during that time. 31 of those prisoners were met with the following fates. 22 were recaptured, 7 were shot and killed, and 2 were drowned. 3 prisoners who escaped and were never accounted for were John and Clarence Anglin and another inmate by the name of Frank Morris. The 3 made their daring and improbable escape on June 11, 1962. Clint Eastwood starred as Frank Morris in the 1979 movie Escape from Alcatraz that detailed the Anglin and Morris's recount of the trio's late-night escape. One of the largest manhunts in U.S. history ensued involving local, state, and federal law enforcement as well as National Guard personnel. These searches turned up no leads on what may have happened to the men. Authorities quickly claimed that the trio most likely did not survive as the water was too cold, was whipped by strong currents, and was full of prowling sharks. A makeshift raft that they had made of glued together raincoats was found washed ashore, but no trace of the men was ever found. Throughout the years, witnesses claimed to have seen the men at various locations. Family members reported long-distance communications, and one man on his deathbed claimed to be Frank Norris and said that the Anglin brothers were still alive but did not divulge their location before he died. Within the last few years, family members of the Anglins released letters and photographs to the public that they claim had been sent over the decades from John and Clarence, who they believe had made their way to South America and lived the rest of their days on a farm in Brazil. The truth is still elusive, however, whether the ending of the story is true or not. The tale of the most amazing escape from the most formidable of prisons, believe it or not, began right here in Hamilton, Ohio. So that photograph down there at the lower, that's supposed to be them sometime during the 1970s. It's next to a rather large termite mound that was believed to have been taken in Brazil. The family claims that those are the gentlemen, but actually cannot prove it. So, is there Spanish treasure buried in Butler County somewhere just south of Trenton? Legend says yes. Again, like most of these tales, cannot be proven, though people have looked for it for decades, and to yet nothing has been found. So buried Spanish treasure, again, just south of Trenton. In 1749, a group of settlers from the Virginia colony were camped along the Great Miami River near present-day Trenton. If you look at this map right here, you'll notice that there's Lake Erie, and this is kind of where we are, right? And the Virginia colony actually claimed all of these lands that actually kind of go up into Michigan, all the way over, to almost the Mississippi River. So this was all Virginia. So this is why those Virginia colonists were actually in the area in 1749. So there's the Maryland colony that went all the way up to Lake Erie, all the way from Chesapeake Bay. So they were claiming large portions of land, most of which they had never actually been to. That there had been some mapping done, obviously. These men from the Virginia colony were tracking a Shawnee raiding party that had attacked the settlement. As the map indicates, these lands at the time were claimed by Virginia. While the trackers were resting, a gaunt young man, looking very much worse for wear, stumbled into the camp. He fell to his knees, thanking God for his luck in finding the Virginians. They inquired how this Spaniard came to be in the area all alone. He said he was a Castilian named Ferdinand de Rey. At first, he was rather uncommunicative and stayed off to himself for the most part and seemed to be searching for something in the area. After 12 days, the tracking party was ordered to return to Virginia. De Rey went with them, and one evening they made camp along the Muskingum River. De Rey had been ill for several days and was getting worse. Fearing death was near, he told the following tale, which one of the Virginians documented in his journal. De Rey had said that 2 years prior, he had fallen in love with a Spanish princess of the royal household, and that the princess returned his love. They eloped, but word of their marriage had leaked out, and her furious father sent soldiers in pursuit. De Rey and his bride fled Madrid, took a ship to the New World. The two planned to find a relative of De Rey's who was a member of an exploration party mapping the west side of the Mississippi River. The young couple made their way west as far as the Great Miami and stopped near the spot where De Rey had encountered the Virginians. Soon, natives surrounded the couple. The princess hid in a hollow tree, but she was soon spotted. She was shot by an arrow and killed. De Rey was captured, but managed to escape. He returned to the spot and found that his young bride was dead. He then revealed that the princess had brought with her a stash of jewels worth $150,000, or, in today's money, a little over $11 million. Just as the natives began their attack, she hid the jewels, but she was killed before she could reveal to De Rey where they were hidden. De Rey did perish and is supposedly buried near in or present-day Marietta, Ohio. So, is there $11 million in Spanish jewels somewhere along the banks of the Great Miami near Trenton? Possibly. If you have a shovel, you can go check. There are people who actually go out and that actually have tried to find that. But who knows? We're going to... Yeah, there you go. We're now going to go to Ross Township, which is where I'm from. Frank Nistler was driving home toward Hamilton on State Route 128 at the S-curve about 3 miles south of Hamilton, just across and east of the old Schlichter dump site. At a roadside park, he noticed a late 1960s Dodge Charger pulled out into the middle of the road. He stopped and saw the wounded body of 28-year-old Melvira Vorbroker of Hamilton. She had been shot twice, once in the shoulder and again in the abdomen. Vorbroker told Nistler of her friend, that was also shot, lying a few yards away back inside the park. There he found 22-year-old Georgianne Ryder, a resident of Ross, shot twice in the back. Nistler rushed the girls to Mercy Hospital. Ryder was dead on arrival, and Vorbroker was rushed into surgery. She would survive. Police reported the woman had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm, and according to Vorbroker's descriptions, it was a rifle. She said she and Ryder had stopped at the park to get a drink of water, and while they were sitting in the car talking, a young, clean-cut man dressed in a button-down collared shirt and a sports coat approached the car. He held a rifle and ordered them out of the vehicle. He placed a good-sized distance between them and the girls and asked for the keys. And when Vorbroker underhandedly tossed them to him, he couldn't make the catch, and when the keys hit the ground, he opened fire, striking each girl twice. Apparently, very shortly after the shooting and before Vorbroker was able to collect her keys and move the Charger, a passing motorist reported seeing what appeared to be a man pacing by the car that was sitting with its lights on. They reported seeing no one else. Evidence was found at the scene that backs up this claim, as a grassy spot near the area was trampled down by what appeared to be pacing. However, by the time Nistler had come upon the scene and Vorbroker had managed to climb into her car and back it into the road, the man was gone. Police found a possible suspect nearby who fit the description and had a .22 rifle in the trunk of his car, which had broken down between Hamilton and New Miami. He was arrested, held, but ballistics later confirmed that his rifle did not match the bullet that had killed Georgianne Ryder. And that would be the last viable lead that the police would have for decades. Vorbroker would eventually move to Florida. The case would be reopened a couple of times, once in the mid-1970s and the most recent being in 2023 by the Butler County Sheriff's Office. In a repeat police interview years after the incident, Vorbroker again retold her tale. It remained essentially the same, save for some very minor discrepancies, but police had always wondered about several of the details, including why a well-dressed man in a sports coat was wielding a rifle at a roadside park. Why did the girls stop to get a drink between 12:30 and 1 a.m. at a completely unlit park? park, and the fact that Vorbroker was certain there was no other vehicle in the park. The crime scene would disappear in 1972 when the sheriff's office asked the state to close and demolish the roadside park. It had become increasingly sordid, violent, and criminal. Sex and drug deals were frequent, arson occurred regularly, and the state complied in November of 72 and bulldozed the site. Police would reopen the case again in 2023 at the request of Ryder's remaining family, which is namely her niece. Melvira Vorbroker is still alive in Florida, but refused to speak to police over the phone. And when they showed up at her door, they were told by a woman who answered that Vorbroker was not at home and wouldn't be back for quite some time. Based on rumors of park activities back in 1970 and a few other small clues, police have created a scenario that today is really not all that shocking, but in 1970 would have been. It would have been a little bit more difficult to explain. Police believe that at least one of the ladies, and possibly both of them, knew the assailant, and that it might not have been a young man, but was actually a young woman. Police proposed a love triangle and a slighted lover was the shooter, and that she most likely lived in the area for decades after the murder. Most of the witnesses and immediate family members of the case are dead. The one person who knows the truth, Melvira Vorbroker, is not talking anymore, either because she may now be afraid that she's seen as a suspect, or at the very least may be guilty of obstructing a police investigation multiple times. Ryder's surviving family still wants answers, obviously, and they are hopeful they will eventually receive them, but as time moves on, that seems to be less and less. That roadside park, eventually, I've talked to some people who actually went to school with George Ann Ryder. They're friends of mine who live in Ross with me, colleagues, and they said that back in the 1970s, that was a place that people would go to when they did not want to be known in the public as not heterosexual. So, is that the case? That's why the police, I believe that. All right, weird creatures. Yes, that is the picture of Bigfoot up there, and yes, there have been sightings or supposed sightings of Bigfoot in Butler County. We will talk about those. So we've all heard about animals popping up in places they don't belong. Today's world, the odds of exotic animals showing up are commonplace and may not be all that mysterious. For instance, in September of 2011, an alligator measuring 2 foot in length is found in a treatment pit at the Hamilton wastewater facility right down the road. Actually, my son works there now, and actually it was 3 or 4 months ago they found a rather large, the largest beaver that had been seen in this area. He said it was gigantic, and it was down in one of the emptied pits. How it fell in there, they're not sure, but they were able to manage to get it out, and they took it back to the river. Odds are that someone flushed the alligator down the toilet when it was smaller and actually had survived. But on July 29th of 1892, Mr. G.W. Beckett of Oxford Township had a 101-acre farm located just northwest of Oxford proper. And in the Hamilton Daily Republican was the following story that he had killed 2 large snakes on his farm that were over 8 feet long. That had been suspected of eating his pigs and his chickens. However, not long after that, most likely the real culprit was found. Another snake in the same area was killed measuring over 20 feet long, according to the paper, with a head the size of a bushel basket. Now, the only snakes that I think are known to get that long are living in South America. So whether in 1892 someone brought a boa constrictor or a python or an anaconda back to Butler County, who knows? Or maybe they just grew them bigger back then. In the summer of 1967, James Morgan and 4 others spotted a flying animal over his home just outside of Middletown. He said it resembled a pterodactyl. It had leather-like skin, was dark in color, no feathers, and had a wingspan of 15 to 20 feet. And of course, the first question they were asked by police when arrived on scene, have you been having anything to drink? They said no. In 1972, reports of a werewolf-like animal, described as a large black dog running on its hind legs, was spotted by passing motorists on Route 4, just north of Posstown. In 1963, motorists report what appears to be a kangaroo crossing State Route 63 near Monroe. Responding State Trooper James Patrick also reports the animal, which, in his report, he says, quote, "sure looked like a kangaroo to me." And in 2004, Rick Schreiber of Fairfield reports to local police a kangaroo in his backyard. Bigfoot, or as the cryptid became known in this area as the Grass Man, based on a dome-shaped nest-like structures that were found in northwest Hamilton County in the 70s, near where a 7-foot-tall hairy biped had been seen. The wigwam-type structures were constructed with grass and twigs, and this was in 1975. The next year, there were 2 sightings on the Preble-Butler County line, including 3 teens who saw a dark, hairy creature looking at them over the corn in a nearby field. When the corn was measured by police, it was approximately 7 foot in height, as well as sightings surrounding Butler County in communities as Eaton, Woodlawn, Milford, and multiple sightings in Warren County. In 1977, Jackie Smith found 20-inch humanoid footprints in the snow near her home just west of Hamilton in Hanover Township. That same year, a 9-foot-tall, 500-pound creature was spotted south of Germantown, along with several huge humanoid footprints in a nearby field. In 1995, 2 hunters near Trenton claimed to be chased by a smelly, fur-covered creature for several yards before it broke off and disappeared. Okeana and Morgan Township had numerous sightings in the early 2000s, including a 2000 sighting near Governor's Bed Park where campers reported a foul smell and witnessed a 7-foot ape-like creature nearby. 2002, Okeana residents spotted and heard a creature on numerous occasions which gave off a long, prolonged wail. It was seen by numerous people in a span of 2 weeks, and reports described it as a 8-foot hairy creature with left large tracks in the area. And you can go online and hear the recording of what they claim to be a Bigfoot-like creature. Who knows? And in September of 2001, the sighting in Hanover Township was almost identical to the Bigfoot-like creature that had reported in the same area over a decade earlier. So there is that. So who knows? Now, this is actually verifiable and real, and actually I have a personal account with this out in Ross Township. So you may remember a few months ago there were reports of a tiger loose in Clifton down by UC, reported by multiple witnesses. Cincinnati police searched for the cat, did not find, or they did actually find large feline-like prints in landscaping, but when they called the Cincinnati Zoo and the zoo said nope, all their tigers were accounted for, they basically called off the search. But Butler County is no stranger to large cat sightings. It is known that bobcats are back in the area. They're spotted on trail cams all around the county, and even one was killed by a truck on 126 in Shandon about 3 years ago. While cougars were officially eliminated from Butler County in 1845, but it could have been as early as 1838. However, from 1950 to 2004, there were 135 cougar sightings in Ohio, and there were 118 between 1983 to 2000, ranking Ohio as 10th in the number of sightings of large cats across the country. And some of those sightings were in Butler County. 2011 was a big year for large cat sightings, including reports south of Camden, multiple sightings on Brown Run Road in Madison Township, including trail cam captures. Another occurred on Route 63 west of Lebanon Correctional. And in October, a report was filed about a cougar on West Kemper Road in Coleraine Township heading west toward Ross. And in December of that year, a large cat was spotted along the west side of I-75 just north of Middletown, chasing deer before disappearing into the trees. A Black Panther-like cat was tracked and hunted down in Liberty Township in 1949. The paper described it as being 4 foot long and weighing 150 pounds and looking like a completely black furred bobcat, though those specks are much larger than a typical bobcat. Its fangs and claws were described as long as a man's index finger. So, was it a black panther or a giant melanistic bobcat? So there are genetic defects or occurrences where cats are all black, and again that is a melanistic genetic defect. However, I do know that when I lived in we moved to Ross in 1979, and I was in, this is probably about 1980, 1981, we moved to a 40-acre farm, which had a large hill on the south, or the west side of it. And we would camp up there regularly, and I know one night we were up there, I was up there with some friends, and I believe my brother was up there, and it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, and we were still awake, and the panthers and cougars are missing a structure in their vocal cords which don't allow them to growl. That's why they have that more screeching type not growling like a lion or a tiger, because they just physically can't, because they're missing that. We clearly heard what sounded like one of those mountain lion panther screeches. Needless to say, we packed up some things and went back to the house. And I do know that sometime in the late 1980s, there was a report, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources came out. A deer had been found on Timberman Road in Ross, and the ODNR basically claimed that the remains of the deer pretty much appeared to be the kill of a large feline. However, nothing has been proven as far as panthers. They have been seen, what appear to be panthers, on trail cams, as I said, but clearly bobcats are around. They've almost completely taken over Fernald Preserve. There's quite a large number of them in there, and I have no idea, if they are genetically mutated because of all the radiation or not. I have no idea. Speaking of Fernald, 1984, Henry Easterling met his co-worker David Box at the White Castle in Sharonville, and they would carpool nightly to the uranium processing feed materials plant at Fernald. Though most of the plant is in Hamilton County, a sizable portion also rests in Ross Township, which is why I included it. Easterling and Bex arrived at the plant. They go to the locker room and prepare for the evening's work. Box is a maintenance engineer for the plant, meaning he is well versed on safety procedures and all the danger zones in the plant, which processes uranium for nuclear devices, mainly weapons. Box tells Easterling that he has work to do in Building 4 that night. The next morning after his shift, Easterling returns to the locker room and notices that Box's toolbox, his lunchbox, and his car keys are still sitting on the bench. David Box does not show up. Easterling assumes that Box must have had an emergency and left without telling him. He drives back to the White Castle and notices Box's car is still sitting in the parking lot where he had left it the previous night. This is when Easterling begins to worry. And it was justified. David Box did not go home, nor did he contact anyone else the previous night. Soon, Box is reported as missing, and the last time he is seen was the night before, sitting in a pickup truck of a supervisor. Witnesses reported that they appeared to be having a serious discussion that may have been heated, but the windows were up, so the witnesses did not hear the conversation. Box would never be seen again. Later, workers noticed irregularities with a temperature reading sensor report in a molten salt vat in building number 6. The molten salt in the vat reaches temperatures of 1,300 degrees, and it was noticed that late the night before, there was a deviation of a few degrees with the temperature monitoring system. Deviations usually occur when items are introduced into the vat, such as the uranium mold casings that the vat is meant to clean. The temperature will dip for a very short period and then return to normal. The drop that night, Box disappears, was ever so slight and very quick, but it did register on machines. Something went into the vat that night, and compared to the mold casings, it was apparently very light. After it was discovered Box was missing, the vat was ordered shut down. It took several days for the contents to cool, but when they did, they found a wire, a padlock, and a set of keys, and what appeared to be bone fragments, but that they could not be identified as human. The keys were identified as those belonging to Dave Box. The initial cause of death was rumored to be suicide. However, the contortions to lower oneself into the vat would be highly difficult, as the lid was only partially opened, and besides, lowering yourself into a 1,300-degree vat of molten salt seems improbable and unbearable. Jumping in was discounted as well, again, due to the partially covered opening. It just wasn't deemed possible, but it was deemed possible, but would have to be a near-perfect fall. Another conjecture was that Box was bound with the wire and locked with the padlock and lowered into the vat with a nearby crane. Investigations turned up nothing. Even though it was reported by some employees that Box was going to blow the whistle on unsafe and dangerous conditions and accidents at the plant, no proof of this could be found. 2 years after the disappearance, Box was declared legally dead and his death was classified as an accident, though some police, Box's family, Harry Easterling, and reporters who investigated the story disagree with that finding. They believed him to be murdered to be kept quiet. So, and it did eventually come out that during this time period that Fernald was dumping huge amounts of uranium dust into the air because the scrubbers and the cleaners and the stacks had not been maintained and were not properly functioning. And it's believed that Box knew that and had asked for those to be fixed, and they weren't. and that he was going to go to the government and tell them what was going on. And that was the reason for his disappearance. There seems to be a lot of, this is a hot topic for some people apparently. It's, there are people who believe in other weird things. I know people who will believe in a ghost any day of the week, but you talk about, aliens, most likely, again, UFO just means unidentified flying object. Something in the ground or on the air that can't be identified. Doesn't mean it has an alien in it, but that's what most people go to, is the extraterrestrial thing. In the fall of 1973, embattled President Richard Nixon was struggling to keep Watergate from becoming a political nightmare. There were wars in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Cher and Gladys Knight and the Pips had the longest running hits on the Billboard charts with Half Breed and Midnight Train to Georgia. 9 of the top 10 TV shows that year were on CBS. They were led by All in the Family, closely followed by The Waltons. Others were MASH, Hawaii Five-0, Maude, Kojak, and The Sonny and Cher Show, Mary Tyler Moore, and Cannon. And Sanford and Son was the only non-CBS entry. That was an NBC show. Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon was the #1 film for 3 weeks in September and October, grossing a whopping $2.3 million. And in 1973 marked the last year of cheap gas, as OPEC would initiate its oil embargo in 1974. So this is what's going on. September and October of 73 marked an odd time, and it was a high point in UFO sightings in the USA. A widespread wave of sightings is known as a flap in UFOologist lingo, and the fall of 1973 flap set itself apart in a number of ways from previous mass sightings. One was just the sheer number of sightings around the U.S. and abroad. And secondly was that this was the first year where contact with supposed alien beings became rampant. So, abduction stories exploded in 1973. It was in October of that year that the famous Pascagoula, Mississippi abduction case of Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson occurred, and it is still considered by some experts to be the most authentic abduction case in UFO history. A large number of sightings and events in 73 involved local police and fire personnel, military personnel, civilian and military pilots, and air traffic control personnel, as well as politicians, which some basically say leads more credence to the authenticity. I'm not sure about the politicians, but yeah, the other ones, sure, why not? In October 15th of 1973, Ohio Governor John Gilligan and his wife report seeing a UFO for several minutes while traveling. And it was in 1973, after this wave of sightings at his home state in Georgia, that soon-to-be President Jimmy Carter made made it known to the world that he had seen a UFO in 1969, and Butler County was no different. So, October 7th was the first reported sighting in this unprecedented wave of odd aerial lights. Members of a retirement community in Middletown report seeing a cigar-shaped object with 3 trailing lights. Dozens of witnesses made similar reports from Middletown over the next several nights. 2 nights later, on October 9th, a woman in the Okeana area in Morgan Township called the Sheriff's Department to report a ball of light with 2 tails moving slowly in colored orange headed to the north toward Riley. Later that evening, also near Okeana, another woman reports seeing a brightly shining cigar-shaped object low on the horizon. She pulls over and in her car watches it hover and fly around for 5 minutes before it disappears. October 11th, a woman and her teenage daughter spotted a red glowing ball with 4 other objects near Clark Street in Williamsdale. They called the police. The responding officer also reports seeing the objects as well and requests backup. No other witnesses in the area are reported spotting orange, green, and white lights hovering that evening. That same evening, over LaSwordsville Trailer Park in Lemon Township, a report came in of a ball of light and smaller corresponding lights moving at medium speed. They eventually merged and took off vertically at a tremendous pace. October 14th, police in Middletown and Germantown received numerous calls of a formation of lights at treetop level. They seemed to join and then took off at a tremendous speed similar to those spotted the night before. On October 15th, calls from Trenton report a glowing gold ball just above the treetops and then a separate streaking light moving at rapid speed, while the same evening reports from Middletown police detailed 2 objects trailing what appeared to be sparks and 2 other round objects hovering before disappearing. Trenton police also respond to calls that an object had traveled below the trees and seemed to land on State Street. Of course, responding officers find nothing. Also during the month of October, 2 Hamilton police officers filed separate reports on the same evening while patrolling near 7th and High Streets of a noiseless oval-shaped light seen between 4 and 4:30 in the morning. And on October 2nd at 9 p.m., 4 Morgan Township residents report a bright ball of light that seems to be investigating a nearby farm before flying off toward Riley. That same night, Captain Otis Kimbrell of the New Miami Police Department trails a UFO from Overpeck to Cherokee Park, which he said was flying at about 1,500 feet. It circles the village several times before departing. And a few days later, Mr. Delmer Schell was traveling on Stillwell Beckett Road when he spotted 2 Air Force jets following a bright, noiseless, wingless, and tailless object. It is said, he said it appeared to be traveling southwest directly over Riley with the jets in pursuit. Calls to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton callers were told that the Air Force was no longer investigating unidentified aerial phenomena since closing of Project Blue Book in 1969. We now know that that is false. In Fairfield, Charles and Jerry Wilhelm, a husband and wife team, headed up the Ohio UFO Investigators League, which supported numerous investigators around the county. Mrs. Wilhelm collects eyewitness reports as well as documents her own sightings, which occurred over a period of several nights in the same area at the same approximate time. The Butler County Sheriff's Office, the Hamilton Police Department, and the Journal-News all set up reporting hotlines during this time. No official reports were given that included witnesses' names. However, all the agencies received dozens upon dozens of, quote, anonymous reports. By the second week of November, most of the sightings had all but stopped. So as you can see, some people had some fun with this. Wes Schell basically put an ad in the paper for some land that basically said, hey, aliens, you're looking for some land on Earth. If that's why you're here, come see us. Obviously, radio stations replayed Orson Welles' War of the Worlds and so forth. So, 21 miles north of Cincinnati is a small village known as Maud. It's also known throughout the years as Maud's, Maudville, but it was first actually called Shoemaker. In the 1890s, apparitions were seen by numerous citizens of purported excellent character and synonymous with truthfulness and fine character. Odd thing is the story was reported in various newspapers throughout Ohio and the Midwest, but not locally. I saw this story in an Akron paper, I saw it in Indiana papers, I saw it as far away as Iowa papers, but locally, no Hamilton papers covered this story, and I'm not sure why. It revolves around one George Washington Swearingen, who lived on his father's land in Union Township, which was previously owned by a gentleman named Jonathan Grimes, who was a reverend, missionary, and reported patron saint of local Miami tribal members. The area in the township, including Swearingen's land, was the burying ground for around 1,500 Miami ancestors. After the Miami's defeat to Anthony Wayne, including the loss of over 250 natives of the local area, in order to help them, Grimes purchases 2,000 acres for the Miamis to live on in Union Township. Over time, the land is split and split and split until there was just a 3-acre burial ground. Grimes fell ill. Swearingen's father purchased a portion of the land, including the cemetery, and Grimes made Swearingen promise that he would not plow the ground of the graves. Over time, children played there. The remnants vanished of the burials in the cemetery. The elder Swearingen passed of cholera, and his son, George Washington, took over his father's land and kept his father's promise as well. However, in 1880, George moves to Maud and rents out the homestead. The new landholder recklessly plows and plants over the grave sites. Soon, spirits of an old white man and several natives were seen on the spot. Word spread of the apparitions in the area became a curiosity, with numerous folks witnessing the spirits who appeared to be arguing and angry, though no sound was ever heard. Jacob Hoover, an esteemed citizen of the area, saw the figures more than anyone else and reported that the ghosts seemed to be pleading with him as they approached, but would disappear before reaching him. Oddly enough, on a quick side note, George Washington Swearingen was a descendant of Marmaduke von Swearingen, who at the time was known as the kidnapped white infant who supposedly grew up to be the Shawnee Chief Blue Jacket. However, within the last 12 years, DNA data has shown that Blue Jacket was not a Caucasian and that he was actually a true Shawnee, so that legend has been put to bed, and that is why you cannot go see the outdoor drama Blue Jacket anymore up north, because the Shawnee basically said that's not true anymore, so please don't perform that. Even though they believed it was for a long time. New Year's Day, 1905, it turned very tragic very quickly. West of Middletown on the CH&D main line, two trains collided head-on. Only one person was killed. The CH&D engineer who had ignored warnings and superstition but died a hero. Veteran engineer Jacob Meyer of Lima, Ohio, was piloting the southbound Detroit-Cincinnati limited engine number 200 when it plowed into a stationary northbound freight train. There were 11 injuries, 8 passengers and the fireman on Meyer's train and 2 crewmen on the freight train. It took 45 minutes for medical attention to arrive, but Jacobs was long gone by then. In fact, the coroner reported that he was most likely killed instantly. The freight train was supposed to be on a siding between Hino, now known as present-day West Middletown, and Posttown to allow the express passenger train, which was traveling at over 40 miles an hour, to pass. For reasons unknown, they didn't make it in time. They sent a flagman up ahead to ward the oncoming passenger locomotive, but it was too late. The tender of Myers' train crushed his cab. His other crew members had jumped off before the collision. Both engines accordioned into one another and tilted up off the tracks at a near 45-degree angle after the collision, which occurred on a trestle that spans Brown Run. Initially, Myers' body was not located. However, it was reported that a severed, mangled arm and hand was still gripping the air brake lever. Eventually, his body would be discovered the following evening in the twisted wreckage of the locomotives. He made no attempt to jump from the engine, but stuck to his post and continued to slow the train until the last possible moment. Experts claim his actions most likely reduced the casualty list considerably. Myers' fireman, Christopher Toohey, reportedly became what was described as, quote, crazed and set to tunneling through the burning metal wreckage with his bare hands. He was finally restrained and sent to Mercy Hospital in Hamilton. He returned later that day, sat on the wreckage, and just stared blankly for several hours. The ironic twist to the story is that the run was turned down by another veteran engineer who refused to drive engine number 200 due to its reputation among CH&D crews as that of being a cursed engine. The engine had reportedly suffered from numerous odd and mysterious mechanical issues. It was also the primary player in a previous crash that killed an engineer and fireman that were manning it. It took little time for the locomotive to gain this reputation. Myers reportedly laughed and took the run, shaking off the superstitions, calling them nonsense. It would be the last run he would ever make. In 1892, an article in the Middletown newspaper recounts a tale told by a gentleman only known as John, who purports that in 1849, when he was around 14 years of age, there came a distinctive knock on the farmhouse door of his parents' home. 4 slow knocks. This was a known signal of local Underground Railroad conductors. It was a prominent Hamilton doctor who was known to be an important conductor for the Underground Railroad in the area. Research has highlighted at least 3 possible candidates, as all were prominent Hamilton doctors and known abolitionists: Dr. Cyrus Falconer, Dr. Laomi Rigdon, or Dr. William Scobie. The boy's parents whisked the man behind closed doors, and listening with his ear to the door, John heard the tale of how the doctor was ferrying 2 wagons containing 21 escaped slaves from Hamilton to West Elkton, which was a major station and point of dispersal for parts northward on the railroad. The doctor feared he was being tracked by bounty hunters, so he decided to hide his cargo in a nearby well-hidden cave on John's father's land. The cave was said to be 6 miles northwest from the corner of Main and 3rd Streets in Middletown along Elk Creek. Only a very few knew of the spot, and someone had relayed to the doctor the location of the secretive cave, but they apparently left one vital piece of information out. Upon hearing the doctor's reactions, the farmer panicked. He told the doctor the cave was known to contain a poisonous gas that was deadly. The farmer and the doctor, after a brief discussion on new plans, headed off to the cave. When they arrived, the worst had occurred. All 21 of the escapees were dead, huddled on the floor of the cave, many in each other's arms. The doctor was horrified at what he caused, but eventually convinced himself that it must have been God's will that the victims suffer this fate instead of capture and return to their owners. The following morning, John reported that he and his father went back to the cave and sealed it with rocks and earth. The location of the cave has never been found since despite several attempts to locate it by local historians, curious locals, and even ventures covered by travel magazines and explorers groups. One such case was in 1920, when using information provided by a 90-plus-year-old retired school administrator who in the 1940s had overheard a farmer who owned the land at the time telling a hunter that he could hunt that land but to stay away from that area that once contained a deadly cave. He warned that if he found out the hunter was poking around there, he would never allow him back. As of today, the location is still unknown, but locals and others still seek it. Matter of fact, the last time a party was organized by the Madison Historical Society and some other folks was in 2023, I believe, 2022 or 2023. Some geologic experts say the story is a legend, as the land and geologic structure of the area could not sustain such a cave. However, others in the field disagree, and some point to the underground gas caverns that are located north of Monroe as a sign that it is certainly possible. And I did not know there were underground gas caves north of Monroe, but one of our volunteers here actually said that she used to work for a oil company that was located just outside of Monroe, and every year they had to do emergency practice for if there was a massive gas leak in these caves. They basically reduce the pressure every year, but had no idea. But yeah, up north of Monroe, around Yankee Road. We're going to end with probably the most enduring of Butler County mysteries. Actually, our April lecture series talk, a lady by the name of Jenny Wenger, who's been researching Ron Tamman's disappearance for over 15 years. She was a Miami alum and heard it when she was on campus, became obsessed with it, and has been researching it, like I said, for the last 16 years. She's coming down from Cleveland to talk with here on April 26th, I believe. We've actually booked her for 2 times because we believe, again, both of those are going to sell out. This is a very popular topic when brought up on social media. She has been following documents. She's requested documents from the Freedom of Information Act from the FBI as they were involved in the investigation. I met her for the first time last summer. She was in town doing some investigation for the case involving a check that was written by Champion Paper to Ron Tamman 2 weeks before his disappearance that was never cashed. And she has trying to figure out why in the world Champion Paper wrote a check to Ron Tamman. He never worked there. There are some rumors that he might have been associated with someone who worked there in the office that actually cut the check, but that's what she's investigating. But she found some interesting things. This talk is now available on our website as far as making reservations. We do require reservations. Our one this month has sold out twice. We added a day. It's sold out again in 3 days. So if you're interested in this story once we go through it, or if you're already familiar with it and want to find out what she believes, which I think is very interesting, come on down and see us on April 26th. So anyway, on a cold, blustery night on April 19th, 1953, Miami University sophomore Ron Tamman seemingly disappears from the face of the earth, and what's more, in the following years afterwards, very little, if anything, has been added to a possible solution. It was about 9 p.m. that night. Tamman's roommate Charles Finley returns from the weekend visit to Dayton. He discovers the dorm room open, the radio playing, Tamman's psychology book open on the desk, the lights were on, and nothing out of place. Also left behind were Tamman's wallet, his car keys, his watch, and his coat. Everything seemed to be there except Tamman himself, or a note that says where he might be. His 1939 Chevrolet was in its usual parking spot. His bass fiddle, which he played in a campus dance band, was in the back seat. Later it was learned that there was over $200 in his bank account at the time. It was never withdrawn. He hadn't contacted his brother Richard, who was a Miami freshman living in another dorm. Tamman, 5'10", 175 pounds, was last seen around 8 p.m. that night when the dorm mother provided him with a clean set of bed linens when he told her that someone had, quote, placed a dead fish in his bed. According to 1953 reports, his friends describe him as stable, responsible, and friendly, not the person to run away without telling anyone. Theories have ranged from amnesia to murder to the possibility that Tamman, who was enrolled in the Navy ROTC program, ran away to avoid the possibility of being ordered to serve in the Korean War. There were no signs of struggle, no ransom note was ever left, so kidnapping was dismissed. Hundreds of locals and students combed the Miami University grounds searching for any sign of the young man. It was reported that he might have been seen in his car speaking to an older woman the day before his disappearance, and that it might have been an acquaintance from Hamilton. She was never identified, nor could any proof of that meeting ever be uncovered. On April 22nd, 3 days after he went missing, television stations report the story and flashed Hammond's picture on screens throughout the area and asked if anyone had any information to contact local authorities. There was only one response. A woman from 7 Mile named Clara Spivey and her daughter Barbara reported that a strange-acting young man had knocked on her door around midnight 3 days ago. He was dressed in a white t-shirt, slacks, a very lightweight jacket, no hat, even though it was snowing and below freezing. He had what appeared to be smudges of dirt or oil on his face. He asked directions to the nearest bus stop. She directed him toward Hamilton. He thanked her and walked off in the direction she had indicated. Over the years, Mrs. Spivey's testimony of the evening has come under scrutiny, and many dismiss it as a hoax. Despite investigations by Oxford Police, the Butler County Sheriff, and the FBI, no trace of Ronald Tamman has ever been found. A few weeks after his disappearance, some residents of Fisher Hall report hearing mysterious singing and seeing a ghostly figure in the gardens near the dorm. In 1973, then County Coroner Dr. Garrett Boone reports that he had a visit from Tamman in his office a little less than 5 months before the disappearance. At that time, Boone was in private practice. He said that Tamman had requested a blood test, but would offer no reason as to why. Boone said that in all the years of practicing medicine, that was the only request he had ever received for those services. Boone made the authorities aware of the visit back in 1953, but he says there was never any follow-up by any agency on that information. Journal News reporter Joe Sella, who covers the story in 1953 and was part of a documentary news broadcast in 1976 on the event, became obsessed with solving the case. He traveled the country, meeting with witnesses, friends, family, and classmates, all to no avail. He would eventually pass away in 1980, no closer to the truth, though he had always said that he thought Tamman was alive somewhere, as did Tamman's father. H.H. Stevenson was a student resident employee for Miami in 1953. He had known Ron as he had granted him approval to have a car on campus, which was a luxury for a very few at the time. He thought he'd seen Tamman in a hotel restaurant in Wellsville, New York on August 5th, 1953, as he and his wife were returning home from a vacation. According to an article by Joe Sella in the Journal News, Tamman's look-alike was sitting at a table with a group of men, and he was looking at Stevenson from across the room. Quote, "He was sort of just looking right through me," Stevenson said. Unfortunately, Stevenson didn't say anything to his wife. They left the hotel, and when he did say something, she convinced him to return to see if it was Tamman, but by the time they got back, the men were gone. New hope was breathed into the case when investigators in Walker County, Georgia, were working on a cold case of remains of a young man found just south of Lafayette, Georgia, in 1953. A badly decomposed remains were found there, were never identified, and subsequently buried in an unmarked grave. Forensics has improved greatly over the years, and the Georgia officials contacted the Butler County Sheriff's Office in January of 2008 after noticing similarities in a national crime data bank. One connection, and only a tenuous one at best, was that both Oxford, Ohio, and Lafayette, Georgia, are both on US 27. In 1953, there was no interstate. So the body in Georgia was exhumed, and DNA testing was done, and in June of 2008, it came back as negative of that of Ron Tamman, and so the mystery continues. That is all I have. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. There are so many things we keep uncovering. There actually may be a part 2 to this someday. So if you're into this kind of stuff, check us out and see. Any questions?